Bueno, estamos ya en la recta final de este congreso y me gustaría recordar ahora una frase de Theodore Roosevelt: haz todo lo que puedas, con todo lo que tengas, en el lugar donde estás. Yo sé que ustedes hacen todo lo que pueden, con todo lo que tienen, que es mucho, y ahora vamos a ocuparnos del lugar en el que estamos. Porque para hacer esta mirada al futuro que estamos preparando y aquí en este congreso de CEDE, tenemos que ser muy conscientes del lugar en el que nos encontramos. Hemos analizado todas esas herramientas, estamos todos de acuerdo en que tenemos que dar un paso adelante para la acción, pero ahora tenemos que mirar al horizonte y ver las perspectivas que nos esperan, saber dónde estamos nosotros situados y saber dónde están situados el resto de los actores políticos en el tablero actual. Y eso es lo que vamos a hacer en estas dos mesas que tenemos a continuación. Hemos dicho al principio que desde Zaragoza estamos mirando al mundo. Bueno, pues desde Zaragoza vamos a situarnos en el mundo y vamos a hacer esa mirada global y ver cómo es esa llamada a la acción en la empresa aquí en Europa, pero también al otro lado del Atlántico. Queremos comenzar con la reflexión sobre el lugar en el que está ahora Estados Unidos y va a llevar la batuta de esta reflexión Isidro Fainé, el presidente de la Fundación CEDE.
No digo ni buenos días ni buenas tardes, porque llevamos ya bastante tiempo aquí, ¿no? Pues buenos días a todos, good morning everyone. Constituye un verdadero honor para mí presentar a la ponente que escucharemos a continuación, doña Rebeca Romero. Ella es presidenta y consejera delegada de la Asociación Independent Community Bankers of America, habitualmente conocido por sus siglas ICBA. Dear Rebecca, on behalf of CEDE, I would like to extend our warmest welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation to be here with us at our annual Congress. We are also delighted by the presence of the three members of your family who are with you today, your husband John, and your daughters Isabella and Eliana. We are also extremely grateful for the presence at this event of the chairman of the ICBA, Mr. Jack Joppins, and his wife, Gina. If you allow me, I will continue in Spanish. La asociación ICBA es la principal entidad de representación de los bancos comunitarios en Estados Unidos. Bajo el liderazgo de Rebeca Romero, la ICBA ha promovido importantes reformas regulatorias que mejoran las actividades de unos 5.000 bancos comunitarios, cajas de ahorro para entendernos, las cuales operan a lo largo y ancho de todos Estados Unidos. En agregado, los miembros del ICBA gestionan 5,7 billones de dólares en activos y conceden 3,6 billones de dólares en préstamos a consumidores, pequeñas empresas y también explotaciones agrícolas. De hecho, estos bancos son artífices de casi el 80% de los préstamos agrícolas en Estados Unidos, lo cual significa que desempeñan un papel fundamental en este sector primario tan importante en la primera economía mundial. Rebeca Romero nació en Taos, Nuevo México, y es banquera comunitaria de tercera generación. Se graduó en el Wellesley College y también se tituló en el Pacific Coast School of Banking. Nuestra ilustre ponente fue consejera delegada y también presidente del Centennial Bank of Taos, tras lo cual asumió el liderazgo nacional de ICBA, de la cual es presidente desde 2016. Es frecuente escuchar su voz en los principales medios de comunicación estadounidenses y ante instituciones tan importantes como el Congreso de los Estados Unidos y la Reserva Federal. Contar con la presidencia de Rebeca no ha sido tarea fácil, ya que pasa gran parte de su tiempo viajando y no solo visitando bancos asociados, sino también reuniéndose con los reguladores bancarios en todo el país. Pero la elevada sensibilidad social de Rebeca nos ha ayudado a que esté hoy aquí compartiendo sus experiencias con nosotros, porque más allá de sus logros profesionales, estamos ante una persona que es una defensora apasionada de las causas sociales y comunitarias. Fue cofundadora de la asociación sin ánimo de lucro Bridges Project for Education, que apoya a estudiantes universitarios, y ha recibido numerosos premios por su liderazgo cívico. A este respecto es un motivo de orgullo destacar que Rebeca desempeña actualmente el cargo de vicepresidenta del World Savings Bank Retail Banking Institute, conocidas por las siglas, como he dicho antes, WSBI, que es el organismo global que agrupa bancos minoristas y cajas de ahorro de todo el mundo, y del cual tengo el honor de ser presidente. Y permitidme que diga públicamente que no me cabe ninguna duda de que Rebeca Romero será la persona más indicada para ser el testigo de presidencia en su debido momento. Y espero que sea este año, pero todavía no he tomado la decisión. Rebeca es motor y palanca de 3 Rs que orientan la actuación del WSBI. Retail, es decir, defensa de la banca minorista inclusiva. Regional o rooted, enraizada en el territorio. Y responsable, responsible, o sea, socialmente responsable. En este sentido, los miembros del WSBI destinamos colectivamente unos 4.000 millones de dólares o 4 billones de dólares a iniciativas sociales y filantrópicas. Esto es posible gracias a las cuantiosas aportaciones de entidades como los community banks y también de las fundaciones bancarias y las cajas de ahorro españolas, junto a una amplia tipología de otras entidades similares a lo ancho del planeta. O sea que tendremos una presidenta, una mujer, que yo quería que fuera también una mujer, tengo 4 hijas y 4 hijos, y quería esta especial sensibilidad que tienes para poder llevar a cabo lo que yo no he podido acabar. Por todas estas razones es un verdadero privilegio contar hoy entre nosotros con Rebeca Romero. Por lo tanto, les invito a todos a escuchar atentamente sus palabras, que estoy seguro serán tan inspiradoras como enriquecedoras. Dear Rebecca, thank you very much again. We will listen with great interest to your inspiring words, and the floor is yours.
Buenas tardes. Es honor estar aquí con ustedes. Thank you, Señor Fine, for that wonderful introduction. I think we all know many individuals in our lives who have proven to be leaders that show us that while change is not easy, change that drives progress, that moves communities forward, that literally drives a country forward, is an individual like Señor Fine. And thank you so much for your contributions, sir. As I share with you a few thoughts this afternoon, I'm going to touch on a couple of different topics. First, I want to give you a bit of a sense of the community banking system in the United States and what makes it so different and why I'm so excited and passionate about representing this industry. I'm also going to share a bit about all the change that we're witnessing in the United States these days under the leadership of the transition to the Trump administration and what that means, at least within our industry and what we're saying. And finally, conclude with a few thoughts and perspectives as I've listened here today and think about the path forward as the recommendations of the Draghi report are implemented. But first, whether I'm testifying before the United States Congress, meeting with the United States President, the Secretary of the Treasury, or the heads of the agencies, the work that we do at ICBA is personal. It's about differentiating and telling the story, the impact that the community banks make in the United States. As Senor Fane shared with you, I am a third-generation community banker. My family's bank was actually started by my grandfather, his family actually immigrated from the Extremadura region of Spain many generations ago. My grandfather believed that a community should have a vehicle in which to retain local deposits, that local capital should be retained within that community, deployed in the form of loans to create additional capital for that community, to grow small businesses, to support schools, to think about the next generation and how that community would continue to grow. And it is that belief, it is that distinction that differentiates the community banks across the United States. It is that belief that by retaining this capital, we create economic development. And we have a tradition of community banking within the United States that has allowed our country to grow small businesses, to support entrepreneurs at a rate and a pace that is unique in the world. I had the unique opportunity to run my family's bank for 20 years. And in that process, I realized firsthand that the rules that we were operating by were not written by people that understood the unique challenges of running a community bank, what it meant to work face-to-face with a customer, not just in the good times, but probably more especially in the difficult times. That, again, is another distinction that sets the U.S. community banking system apart. And that is what took me to ICBA, ICBA, as we might say here in Spain. At ICBA, our association was founded in 1930 by 25 bankers, small community bankers, who were up against some incredible challenges. And they knew the only way they would succeed and survive was if they came together as a group, as an organization, to work together to expand their voice. And now, for 95 years as an organization, we have a history of moving forward and engaging. Our mission at ICBA is to create and promote an environment where community banks flourish. And I draw your attention to two words: create and promote. For me, folks, this means action. It means engagement. It means not accepting the status quo, but seeing a vision and moving it forward. That is what sets us apart. It means tackling the challenges that we face, looking for solutions and not waiting for somebody to do something about it, but taking the action to lead our industry forward. At ICBA, we do three primary things. First and foremost, it's advocacy. Again, whether with the President of the United States, with members of Congress, or with the heads of agencies, we tell the story of what makes community banks different and how we can ensure their success moving forward. We educate, because for us, this is about ensuring, whether it's venues like this where we can come together, we can share ideas, we can collaborate, we take that back to our institutions and help drive that path forward. And we innovate. We are a tradition of banking that is rooted essentially in time. But as we innovate, as we find scale, as we leverage technology, that is a huge part of our success, to think about how these small institutions can continue to serve and create the impact that they do. And we have an incredible footprint in the United States. Each one of these blue-colored dots represents a community bank. Without a community bank, 1 in 5 counties in the U.S. would not have access to a bank. Community banks are in communities where the largest banks have decided they no longer can generate a profit, or they don't, it's too hard. Community banks are in those communities and they continue to move forward. Within this footprint, we see community banks located in cities like New York City, serving a specialized population, in metro, urban, and rural communities all over the country. The concept of community banking is that you support local business. Again, it's this concept of taking local capital, retaining it within the community in the form of those deposits, and deploying it in loans. In doing so, we're helping to create future local businesses and reinvest in the success of the community. And these are the numbers that are probably most staggering. We have over 4,000 community banks in the United States, yet we represent only 20% of the assets. We make, however, 60% of all small business loans. The vast majority of all small business loans in the United States are made by community banks. And we make 80% of all the agriculture loans in the US. Again, going back to that footprint, what is maybe most startling about these numbers is more than half of the community banks are less than $1 billion in assets. In fact, the median size of a community bank in the US is only $475 million. Small institutions creating significant impact. And over 1,000 of these banks have charters that are over 100 years old. Again, it's a tradition of investment. It's a tradition of resilience. It's a tradition of innovation, evolution, focused on how we grow community, how we create strength, and amplify that local community capital. As I said, over 4,000 community banks. And this impact, again, comes down to this concept of size does not matter. What these community banks are able to do is we leverage these assets and we think about, remember I told you, community banks only control 20% of the assets in the United States. It's those 22 banks over 200 billion that control the vast majority of the assets. Yet, we're making 60% of the small business loans. So again, that impact is what allows us to advocate and think about an environment where we're able to continue to do this. So we all know 2025 has been a very interesting year in the United States. Interesting is probably not the best word to describe it, but it's probably the most politically correct. And there's a few trends that I'd like to highlight as I think about what we're seeing. The first is nothing new to the Biden administration. In fact, for many years now in the United States, we are seeing what I like to call a loss of independence in the prudential regulators. The way our banking system of regulation works is the president appoints the members of the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. And for generations, we had the tradition that while those individuals were nominated or appointed by the president, they brought a very independent perspective that was focused on the tenets of monetary and fiscal policy, safety and soundness, not a political agenda. That is no longer the case today. As we think about the leaders in the regulatory agencies, again, not unique to the Trump administration, but for several administrations now, we are seeing a trend where the agencies are used as a way to deploy a bit of an agenda. And for us as institutions, what that means is the rules may look this way today. 4 years later, the pendulum could shift and they look very different. That is something that probably nobody really enjoys, but bankers especially do not enjoy. That shift in how to prepare, how to ensure continuity and that resilience that I talked about in very uncertain political times. The next trend that we're seeing within the current Trump administration is incredible focus on regulatory relief and simplification. As I talk to my counterparts across the world, I have many people look at us almost in a form of envy in terms of all that we are seeing happen. There really is this focus of pullback of deregulatory environment. And the third thing that we're seeing is that is happening at a rate or pace of change unlike anything we have ever seen before. In the last 11 months, we have seen the significant repeal or reproposal of numerous rules. We have seen rules where certain thresholds for reporting or examination requirements have suddenly been shifted. We've seen major changes to capital rules. Just as of this week, those were finalized. Many of those as an industry we have welcomed because we often say we need a proportionate regulatory environment and we need to strip off some of this regulatory weight that has limited the impact and the ability of what we do as organizations. A good example of maybe some of these different political wins that we're seeing is the evolution of the framework for digital assets in the US. You've probably heard a lot about the Genius Act. This was a bill that passed through the United States Congress in 6 months. Major regulatory framework for payment stablecoins, passed in 6 months, unheard of. What this does is create a framework where non-bank entities can issue payment stablecoins. We are also now in the process of developing a whole framework for how these stablecoins will work in the United States. And without going into the boring details or technical aspects of this, the reason I share this as an example is this was a major presidential priority. President Trump was as well as many members of Congress, started out with initiative to say, we need to create this framework. And you might say, well, what are the concerns or what are the challenges? This, along with a lot of the regulatory relief that we're seeing, is creating essentially a new highway for financial activities within the United States, completely outside of the banking foundations. Good for competition. In my mind, very challenging as it relates to safety and soundness, consumer protections, and one key factor. The challenge is that those assets, those deposits could leave the traditional banking system, and as a result, there's less capital to deploy in the form of loans, a key component within the community banking framework. So as I said, that is just an example of some of the many changes we are seeing, again, evolving at an incredibly fast pace. A level of uncertainty that we've not seen before. But again, even with these headwinds, with some of these challenges, we continue to position ourselves from the perspective that Washington must continue to work in this environment where we think proportionately. And when I think proportionately, let's think about risk. Two businesses may do the same thing, but how they do it, what level of capital they have, what level of rules that they are followed by, should look different depending on the level of risk that they're doing. And that is the basic tenet with which we operate at ICBA. And as we think about the environment moving forward, how do we ensure competitiveness? How do we ensure an environment where we can continue to innovate and evolve? How do we ensure an environment where depositors are protected, where consumers are safeguarded? And as I would advocate within the community banking system, again, a core tenet to what we have always done and have proven for generations the ability to do. At ICBA, we like to talk a lot about this concept of empowering potential. And as I have sat here today and listened to these presentations, as I've studied some of the Draghi report, I think this is the key point that we are all trying to drive forward, is how do we maybe get out of our own way to some extent? How do we move forward? How do we leverage the incredible potential within this European environment and system that allows us to continue to innovate? And so while I will not go into details within some of those recommendations, what I would say is now more than ever, I think the world needs and is looking for this action. I think we're looking for an environment in which we see and acknowledge the incredible geopolitical risks that we're facing, but also the incredible opportunity that this represents. How do we create and promote? We take action. And as I think and I reflect on the Spanish banking system and the many leaders, the banks here that have had the opportunity to get to know, the system is incredibly well positioned in a position of strength, resiliency, and at the end of the day, a focus on the social and philanthropic aspect that makes our communities better places to live and work. I encourage you all, how do we leverage that? How do we continue to build upon that? And know that as I reflect from the United States, as I represent our 4,000 members, as we think about this path forward, we stand ready to assist and engage and celebrate your success in the next steps. Thank you all so much for having me, and enjoy the rest of your event. Thank you.